listener production.
Hello, Sasha Barbagat with you. Welcome to The Briefing. Getting in to see a GP has not been easy for a lot of us over the last few years, with rising costs, long wait times and limited availability all playing a role. The government promised to fix it if re-elected. So, have they?
What we found is that the trends that we've seen in bulk billing, where we've seen a decline in bulk billing across the country, that's been completely reversed.
That deep dive into the government's changes to bulk billing is coming up in the second half of this episode. First, it is time for the headlines with Chris Spyrou on Monday, the 12th of January.
Hey Sash, we start today in Victoria, where the state's bushfires have turned deadly, with human remains found near a car in the Longwood blaze. The person, who is yet to be formally identified, is the first confirmed death in fires that started during one of the worst heat waves the state has seen. In a statement last night, the Premier Jacinta Allen said her thoughts are with the victims' families and loved ones.
At the time of recording, a number of emergency warnings for blazes burning are active, but the biggest fire, Longwood, north of Melbourne, where this fatality has sadly occurred, has been downgraded to a watch and act level for now. Despite the signs of easing conditions, authorities expect a number of these fires to burn for weeks to come yet, while devastated local communities are starting to count the cost, with more than 390,000 hectares burnt so far and 300 properties destroyed. 80 of those are believed to be people's homes. One of the hardest hit communities is Harcourt in central Victoria, which has copped the brunt of the destruction.
Now, the Prime Minister and Premier have travelled to firegrounds near Bendigo to announce disaster relief funding, committing $19.5 million to help affected communities.
My message to Victorians is pretty simple. We've got your back, not just during this crisis, but through the recovery as well.
It'll include immediate support for farmers, emergency accommodation, mental health support, and delivering caseworkers to help Victorians who have been impacted. People across Victoria today are also being warned of poor air quality due to smoke from more than 30 fires burning across the state. A reminder too, if you need it, you can keep up to date with the latest via the Vic Emergency website and app.
Yeah, and also, Chris, it's worth noting while we're seeing these devastating bushfires in Victoria, in Australia's north, residents are being smashed by heavy rain and fierce wind after tropical cyclone Koji crossed the coast. So we've seen on the far north coast of Queensland, thousands without power, towns are cut off, roads are closed after this storm crossed over yesterday. There are still some flood warnings in place as well, and major flooding and heavy rain is continuing today. So people are still on alert up there. Now, we know that bushfires and cyclones are part and parcel of life in Australia during summer, but it is worth noting 2025 was the fourth warmest year on record, according to the Bureau of Meteorology, with average temps up 1.23 degrees nationally. And, you know, we know that the climate crisis is impacting the severity of these disasters and how often we're seeing them.
To Sydney now, where thousands of mourners have turned out for a vigil overnight, a month on from the Bondi terror attack. It was the final daily vigil in a Jewish custom called Shloshim, the 30-day mourning period, with rain failing to deter crowds.
Yeah, performers sang Waltzing Matilda for the tragedy's youngest victim, 10-year-old Matilda, holding their phone flashlights in the air, united in their grief for the 15 victims. And her dad, Michael, paid tribute to her during the event.
You know, she was a typical 10-year-old Aussie girl. She loved to laugh, dance, sing, lots of dancing, lots of singing.
Mourners also joined hands with the person standing next to them to observe a minute's silence.
Overseas now into Iran, where more than 500 people have been killed in anti-government protests that have swept the country and now stretch into their third week. According to a US-based human rights group working in Iran, 490 of those confirmed dead were protesters, 48 security personnel, while more than 10,500 people have been arrested.
Now, these demonstrations began on the 28th of December in the country's capital of Tehran over soaring inflation and quickly turned with protesters now calling for an end to the clerical rule of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And in response, the regime's cut off internet access and some call and text capabilities within the country, while also using deadly force and live ammunition to disperse demonstrators.
Meantime, Donald Trump has threatened to intervene, saying the US would, quote, rescue protesters if the government killed them. Over the weekend, we saw rallies against the Iranian regime outside embassies right across the world, with the US president writing on Truth Social, quote, Iran is looking at freedom and the USA stands ready to help. There are reports Trump has been briefed on options for military strikes, as well as using secret cyber weapons, widening sanctions and providing online help to anti-government sources. Iran's overnight responded, saying they will retaliate if attacked by the US, promising to target the country's military and shipping centres in the region, as well as Israel's.
Yeah, and it's worth making the point as well, which I'm sure anyone listening to this would have maybe already drawn a line to, is that this threat from Donald Trump isn't empty after we've seen what happened in Venezuela. So, we know that Trump is going to be further briefed on his options this week, and we'll see whether it results in more military strikes.
Back home now, and the controversy surrounding the Adelaide Writers Festival is continuing, with the chair and several board members resigning over the axing of a Palestinian-Australian author from the event's lineup. Last week, Runda Abdel Fattah was sensationally dumped from the Writers' Week program, with the board saying it would be culturally insensitive for her to appear so soon after the Bondi attack. That decision saw almost 50 confirmed speakers at the event, including Trent Dalton, Peter Fitzsimons, Hannah Ferguson, and Peter Grester, boycott the festival.
Organisers have since had to remove the schedule from the website because of how many writers and speakers are actually boycotting this festival, Chris. And I did a quick check of their website this morning, and that is still the case. There is no schedule. You can't click any links. It's like the event doesn't actually exist. While last night, the ABC reported the festival's chair, Tracy Whiting, had stepped down amid the backlash along with 3 board members. Now, the Jewish Community Council of South Australia did write to the board requesting Abdel Fattah's removal over her previous comments on Israel, including a post on X in which she stated about the Jewish state, quote, the goal is decolonisation and the end of this murderous Zionist colony. So, Chris, this is one of the biggest cultural events in South Australia's calendar. This is a big deal locally, but also nationally, as we have this broader conversation about having these conversations on a stage like the Writers' Festival and, do we want to boycott authors? Do we want to stop people from getting up and speaking? Do we want to shut down views that are different to ours? And, it's a big discussion. It's not something that we can do here on the briefing this morning. But I did want to make the point as well that Abdel Fattah was actually among 10 academics who lobbied the same board of the Writers' Festival in 2024 to dump a Jewish columnist from the event's lineup after they compared the Gaza conflict to the animal kingdom. The board did not remove that writer, and Abdel Fattah has addressed that, and she says that she rejects any allegations of hypocrisy after calling for this author's removal from the festival in 2024, saying that, his comments were completely out of touch and offensive, really. So we will see what happens with this festival. I don't see how it continues without these writers.
And one of our country's biggest sporting events is kicking off today in Melbourne Park. Yes, it's officially opening week of the Australian Open. We've got the qualifiers going down and a bunch of Aussies having a crack, including Cruz Hewitt, Bernard Tomic and Olivia Gadecki.
And of course, we will see a bunch of the big names over the next few days, including Carlos Alcaraz, Djokovic is playing, Jannik Sinner, Coco Gauff, and of course, Arina Sabalenka and Daniil Medvedev, both of whom won titles at the Brisbane International yesterday. So yeah, it's the biggest event of the summer. I reckon this beats out the Ashes. Sorry.
Oh, the Ashes, yes, that great game that I love tuning into here and there, which I learned the rules of last week thanks to a particular member of our team who I won't name on it today. I love it. Summer is for tennis, Sasha Barbagat. We had the United Cup in Sydney. That wrapped up also yesterday. Team Poland won that. Congratulations, Team Poland on that one.
And
Swiatek. Yes, huge names there. I'm so excited to watch the Oz Open over the coming weeks and days. This is the one time a year that I dust off my tennis racket and go and play on the street with my neighbours and my brother.
On the street?
Yeah, legit on the street. And we use bins as nets. It is what it is. But yeah, have a look out on my socials for my little headband and tennis shorts. They'll be on full display over the next coming days.
Will they actually? Because I'll hold you to that.
Ooh, okay.
I'm checking back in on Friday.
Let's do that.
Hey, that is it for the headlines and Chris's little shorts. Coming up next is your deep dive, Chris. We're talking about bulk billing. Has it gotten better under Albanese's second term? Let's find out.
As most of us know, election campaigns are a time for our politicians and leaders to throw around catchy lines and promises, all in the hopes we'll remember them on voting day. And last year, one of the biggest ones came with a prop that the Prime Minister kept whipping out right around the country.
One card covers it all. Not your credit card, this, your Medicare card.
The memories. But that was the main way Albo spruiked the government's commitment to pour $8.5 billion into Medicare over the next 5 years. It was a funding boost he promised would lift bulk billing rates back to 90% by 2030, saving you and I hundreds of dollars a year in out-of-pocket costs when we visit the GP. At the time, though, health officials were warning it could take up to 4 years before we started reaping the rewards. But a new report out today suggests otherwise. James Gillespie is the CEO of Cleanbill, an online directory of all the GPs in Australia who bulk bill and those that don't. James, welcome back to the briefing. The government's changes to Medicare rolled out in November last year. Talk us through what your team's been up to since then and how this report came together.
So what our Blue report looks at is it tries to get an idea of the pricing and availability information for every single GP clinic across the country. This is our 4th annual one because GP clinics update their pricing usually about once a year. And so each year between November and December, we go out, we find every GP clinic we can, and then we call them all to get their basic pricing and availability information before putting all of that information on our cleanbill.com.au directory and then aggregating that information up into our yearly Blue report, which looks at what's happened to pricing and availability for GP clinics across the country over the course of the previous year and going back to when we first collected this information.
So talk me through this one. This will be the first real analysis on the back end of, Albo's big Medicare promise. When it comes to that policy, what have you found? What have been the key changes to bulk billing around the country?
Yeah, so this is a bit of a complex change, but to put it simply, GPs are now receiving more money for becoming fully bulk billing practices. So practices where no matter who you are, when you walk in the door, if you are bulk billed by that GP clinic, they receive more money from the government for seeing you than they did previously. And if they bulk bill every single patient who walks in the door, so if they become 100% bulk billing, they receive an additional amount on top of that, an additional incentive. And so what this report looks at is what have been the effects on bulk billing numbers across the country, how many clinics have started bulk billing as a result of these changes, and what have been the effects on out-of-pocket costs at the clinics that haven't started bulk billing, because it's by no means universally been adopted that every single GP clinic's become fully bulk billing as a result of these changes. And what we found is that the trends that we've seen in bulk billing that I think everyone would be familiar with when trying to find a bulk billing doctor over the past couple of years, where we've seen a decline in bulk billing across the country, that's been completely reversed. In fact, over the last year, the percentage of bulk billing clinics, so the percentage of clinics that are fully bulk billing when you go in the door, that's almost doubled to just above 40%, which means that 4 in 10 GP clinics across the country are now fully bulk billing for every person who walks in the door. But there is a little bit of a sting in the tail of that because out-of-pocket costs, so the cost of visiting a GP if you aren't going to one of those 40% fully bulk billing GP clinics, have also surged. We've seen an over 13% increase in just the last year in the cost of going to visit a GP if you're not being bulk billed. So some good news and some, I guess, more difficult news when you're going to see a GP.
When it comes to that rising out-of-pocket cost, what are some of the driving factors behind that? Do you know?
It's partly statistical. A lot of the clinics that have switched to fully bulk billing under these changes were the clinics that were less expensive prior to the changes. So by those clinics no longer charging out-of-pocket costs, their costs are removed from our average calculations. And so if the cheaper clinics are removed from the average calculations, the averages, of course, will naturally go up. But even once you control for those clinics being removed from the averages, you're still seeing a 6.8% increase in average out-of-pocket costs across the country, which doesn't sound like that much, but it's still 65% higher than the increase that we saw between 2024 and 2025. It's a considerable increase for a lot of people when you're going to see these GPs. As to what's causing that, only the individual GP clinics can answer that question. They're the ones who are setting their prices, and they're setting their prices in the context of the economic circumstances as they see them.
And I mean, one of the examples that caught my attention in the report is, the average total cost of a standard consult in the ACT in Tasmania now exceeds $100, which is an enormous price tag and not something, for us to just be scoffing at. But interestingly, we're seeing these changes in Australia's urban areas and we're seeing a change in our remote areas as well. What can you tell us about what you've noticed in this year's report?
So this comes down to the way that these incentives are structured. So sure, doctors do receive additional incentives for bulk billing patients and for being fully bulk billed clinics, but the amount of that incentive scales based on how remote the clinic is. So clinics in metro areas receive in total about $70 every single time they see a patient and are fully bulk billing for a standard consultation. But if you go way out into MM6 areas, so quite rural areas, there aren't very many clinics out there. But those clinics, when they fully bulk bill, receive closer to $90 for seeing those same patients. So it encourages clinics in more rural areas to become fully bulk billing by providing additional sums to them for doing so. And as a result, we see this trend where clinics that are located in really urbanised areas like the ACT and Western Australia have switched to fully bulk billing at lower rates than clinics in areas that are a lot less urbanised. So what we found is that in these less urbanised states like the Northern Territory and Tasmania, they've actually seen the largest increases in fully bulk billing. And that may in fact be because you've got those higher rebates going to clinics, higher incentives as well going to clinics in those areas because they are located more rurally. They're not all in metro areas.
Now, a big part of the election promise is, something that we were reporting on a lot because it was being said a lot, is that there was a hope that 9 out of 10 GP visits would be bulk billed by 2030. Based on this report and the findings of this report, we are just 2 months into it. But do you think we're on track for that goal by 2030?
Chris, this is where it gets really difficult and becomes quite predictive because it's impossible to know how clinics are going to respond in 3 years' time to a policy change. And it's also very, very difficult to know whether there'll be future policy changes coming down the pipeline that will make a further difference to this. But something interesting that we observed when we were calling these clinics and we were contacting them to get their pricing information was a lot of clinics identified that they had switched to fully bulk billing, but they were doing so on a trial basis, whether that be a year or 6 months, just to figure out what the effect of these quite complex changes would be on their own economic bottom line. And once they've done that trial, once they've figured out, okay, how many new patients are we getting in the door as a result of this? How much money are we bringing in as a clinic? Does that allow us to remain economically viable? Only once clinics have answers to those questions will they decide whether this is something that they continue doing full-time for until 2030 or whether that's something that they decide to switch back and become private or mixed billing again. That's a decision that a lot of clinics will be taking not now, but in 6 months or 12 months' time. So next year's Blue Report will provide us with a bit more insight as to how we're tracking towards that 2030 goal.
I am curious to know, aside from the government's incentives here, would there be any other reason that a GP would switch and become a fully bulk billing practice?
Oh, there are so many reasons, and that's what makes this quite complex as a change to track and determine whether clinics are likely to take it up. I mean, first and foremost, there's just general interactions within the community. If a GP clinic prices their services just higher than these rebates, but notices a need in the community for fully bulk billed services, they'll likely switch. These GPs are members of their community and interact with them every day. If it makes economic sense for those in their community to start seeing a fully bulk billing doctor, then they may just make that switch themselves. But there are also so many other factors to take into account. For example, in New South Wales, GP clinics that bulk bill over 80% of their consultations in city areas and over 70% in rural areas receive a rebate on the payroll tax that they pay at the state level. So that's something that clinics will have to take into account when determining how many patients they bulk bill. There are also so many factors around whether clinics will get new patients in the door. Last year, we were seeing 1.5 million Australians not going to see a GP because of concerns surrounding costs. If a GP clinic thinks that by becoming fully bulk billing, they'll get access to more of those patients coming in the door and filling up their books, then they might decide that it's worth taking a bit of an economic hit on the amount that they're charging those patients in order to get those new patients in the door. So there are so many factors that come into play on this, and that's what makes it really difficult to model. And that's why it's so helpful to have this report, which is just real-time stats.
Now, I know it is very early on. It's only 2 months into this policy rolling out, but kind of the way that you're looking at it at the moment, would you say that this election promise that the government has delivered on was sound policy, it was good policy, or is this policy that still needs a little bit of reworking and it hasn't really taken into account the full extremities and complexities of this situation?
Well, the policy was aimed to improve the percentage of bulk billing clinics, the number of bulk billing clinics across the country. And in that regard, it's been an absolute success. Seeing an almost doubling of the number of GP clinics that are fully bulk billing across the country is huge. That means accessibility for people all across the country is a lot better than it was at this time last year. Whether or not there's more tinkering to be done, I'll leave that to the government. Our focus at the moment is on making sure that everyday Australians can find these fully bulk billing clinics, and if they're in an area which doesn't have any, which has become increasingly rare but still exists, find those clinics that are affordable and available for them to go and visit. And that's why the cleanbill.com.au, the free directory that we maintain that has all of those clinics and their pricing, is just so important.
James, thanks so much for joining us again on The Briefing.
Thank you, Chris.
That was CEO of Cleanbill, James Gillespie, speaking with me there. And that is it for this episode of The Briefing. But before you go, though, we'd love to know if these changes to Medicare have had any impact on the way that you're seeing your GP or the way that you're being charged for your GP visits. Feel free to leave us a comment if you're listening on Spotify, or head to our DMs on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Chris Spyrou. I'll catch you next time.